good evening, everybody. Welcome back to 10 to 1, the internet's favorite movie-centric list-making podcast. I am one of your hosts, Josh, joined as always by Jen.
Hey, I'm once again find myself in the position of having to slightly apologize for having such a, I don't know, uh, terrible body. I'm not really sure. That sounds terrible. I should not say that.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I mean,
but
we're pre-recording this. We can cut that if you want.
I should apologize for not being here due to health reasons once again, but I am trying to get better. I feel like this is a perpetual battle, but hey, I'm here, and I'm just gonna throw this out there, Josh. Never have I needed the subject matter that we decided on for this list more than I have needed it over the past week or so because the everything just sort of fell into place. The old comforts of comedy, somehow they just slide you into a mental state that is absolutely phenomenal. It's kind of like having grandma's cookies or something. There's just something so comforting about it. And I know we've talked about this before. They just don't make movies the way that they used to, and that isn't sort of just a take on an older generation looking backwards. It is really a very firm sort of, we don't do comedy the way that we used to do comedy, and the comedy for this week was actually really interesting, especially when I looked at it in retrospect to what we have now. So I'm kind of excited to share what I thought were some of my best picks.
I think that's going to be a lot of fun to look back at some of the best comedy bits in film from the 1970s, because that is what the list is this week. Comedies of the 1970s. We've gone down this time travel rabbit hole before. We've gone to the 70s before. I believe it was 1970s Earthbound Sci-Fi was
Yeah, that was a fun one, actually.
it was. I'd love it when the list gets so oddly specific
It's
that
amazing
it
that we come up with enough movies.
it is. It is. Um because you never know at what point you're gonna, you know, do your list and just say, I've only seen two of these types of movies in my life.
I think this actually speaks to the volume of films that are actually out there that many of us, not all of us, because I know there's a ton of very well read into film aficionados, um, but that there are so many incredible movies out there that maybe none of us have heard of. And the fact that we're able to continually bring sort of, a dearth of these ideas to the list tells me that there's a lot of uncovered gems out there, that even and I think I've seen a lot of movies. I come up, I mean, I hear you say movies. I have other people tell me, oh, have you seen this one? Have you seen? No, I haven't seen that at all. And then it turns out to be a great movie. So, yeah, lots of good stuff happening.
Well, then, how about we jump right into it with our lists and, kind of get the ball rolling on what the night's going to look like with our number 10s. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
You go first this time.
Number 10, kicking off comedies of the 1970s, is a it did have a remake, I'll tell you that. But this version of it starred George Burns and Art Carney, and it's called Going in Style.
Oh, good choice. George Burns is always a good choice.
George Burns is and one of the greatest comics, I think, in just history. But Going in Style is a 1979 film directed by Martin Brest. It's about three senior citizens that, well, they're they're not getting any younger. I guess that's the way to put it politely. But their quality of life, is not the best. And I think one of the reasons why it was such a timely remake is because even though the movie itself was very uniquely 70s and the times that it was created in, those kinds of situations and problems, those worries, they're essentially timeless, when it comes to getting older and not having enough to live your life rather than just waiting to die. So these three senior citizens, they rob a bank and they want to see if they can get away with it, live. And if they get away with it, be able to live some more. A lot of hijinks ensue. There's some very touching, tender moments, especially for a movie. And I'm not saying movies in the 70s didn't have touching, tender moments or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is, when it's one of those movies where when you go in and you see the cast and you see the plot, you expect this is what it's going to be. And Going in Style does have a way of subverting those expectations by hitting you in the feels throughout, and something that comedy, uh, I think nowadays needs to be better at is making you care about the people involved. Going in Style does all of this wonderfully, and it is my number 10.
That's a really good choice. And honestly, we did not coordinate this at all. I swear, I
We
did not know
never
anything.
do.
Never knew anything about Josh's list. But coincidentally, at my number 10 spot is another film with George Burns. It is the 19, I want to say 79, I think, film called Oh God.
Oh,
Now, I normally would not pick a movie like this. Long before Bruce Almighty, which honestly has sort of endeared itself to me over the years. I don't exactly know why, because because overacting drives me crazy, and honestly, wow, that's a big one. But the there is such a similar vibe to it, although the reason that I love this movie is there is a kind of, let's just say, wholesome feel to it. It makes me remember that despite the fact that and before I even go into this, George Burns made a series of these. There's Oh God, You Devil, there's I don't know, there's like two others. Um
oh God, book two.
Oh God, Book 2. Yes, very ingenious in the writing of the title in that one. Um, there is something about the delivery in this particular movie, that all of these movies, which again, it's extremely wholesome. The comedy is, I struggle with sort of like the right adjective. It's not that it's like pure in the sense that, oh, there there isn't anything objectionable about it, although there really isn't much. But the comedy is, it relies upon itself to keep building, and I find this to be really rare. Like, there is something about the both existential crisis that is happening with the lead character, who is John Denver, and his relationship with George Burns's character, who basically we find out is God, and sort of like what needs to be done and how that continues to build on itself throughout the movie. It really is, I think, one of the easiest moments in sort of 1970s comedy to kind of get a feel for where the comedy came from in the early 70s, how it sort of exploded with a lot of very raunchy, very almost what I think we would consider to be problematic stuff today, but it was very awesome then. And then sort of like this tapering into comedy that's kind of transitions, and that transition is so perfectly encapsulated in the Oh God story. Now, I mean, if you don't know anything about this story, it's basically God comes to this grocery store clerk and basically wants him to s- find a way to get people to either admit or experience in some way that God is real. And, again, there's a super existential crisis that's going on here because it's not, it's an interesting idea in the same way that Bruce Almighty is interesting, in that you have to kind of take at face value that the people in this story believe in God. You don't have to necessarily believe in God to love the movie. It's not like that. But it is an interesting idea that any God would come to just your average everyday person and try to convince them that they are going to be the modern day spokesman for them. And the I think as the film goes on, we see more and more um of this, how not just unconventional George Burns's character is, but also how incredibly resilient the John Denver character is. I can't say that I think that John Denver is like the best actor in the world because, but he's an awesome performer. He really is. And when he's in front of the camera, you absolutely believe that he is Jerry Landers, who is the grocery clerk. And this to me is, again, it's just such a beautiful sort of encapsulation of where the 70s kind of landed. Um and especially I think it becomes to me very near and dear because I remember seeing this particular movie when I was super young and thinking in the end they actually go to court. And to me, that was like the epitome of everything must be super serious if you're in court. And the fact that they took everything to court and then eventually sort of came up with this, oh, yes, of course, everything must be as you say, because this is what happened in court. It's just like, it's such a moment. It's such a brief little tidbit in time when things were quite a bit more simplistic, perhaps, than they are right now. So my number 10 is Oh God. George Burns, his comedic timing in this is also absolutely just whip snap. It is so perfect. And watching him walk around with his cigar and just being himself is an absolute treat. It's the better of all the stories. There's, like Josh said, there's Oh God Book 2, there's Oh God You Devil. This is, I think, the best of all the stories. And it's actually based on a book, which might be why the adaptation material was right there. So there we go. Oh God, my number 10.
Great pick, great movie, and we're off to a wonderful start. Well, my number 9 is going to be a really, really short um, mention
Hmm.
because, quite frankly, it's one that we've talked about at length on several occasions.
Oh,
So it still needed to be talked about on this list, though,
okay.
or at least brought up. If this isn't on a list, then if this isn't on your list, I don't know. I don't know. I'm gonna have to question your movie watching. And considering how smart you're always are on the show and how dumb I sound, it would be quite the travesty for me of all people to have to pull that card.
Oh no, now I'm feeling pressure.
Yeah. So my number 9, not because it's my ninth favorite, but because I wanted to make sure that it was mentioned um, The Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh, yes. That has a bit of a mention on my list a bit further up. So, yeah.
I imagined it would be on your list. But still, I had to put it on there. Otherwise, you would be pulling my movie fan card. And quite frankly, even though you are more qualified to pull a card, I'm gonna just go ahead and uh, shoot first, as it were. Call no, that doesn't sound right in my head. So, what can we say about Monty Python and the Holy Grail that we haven't said before? Nothing. We can't say anything that hasn't been said before on this show because we've talked about it at length. It's a series of absolutely hilarious vignettes all tied together around King Arthur looking for the Holy Grail. Uh, Classic bits, forever and ever quotable. If you haven't watched it and somehow you've stumbled across this show, this is one of the few times I'm going to say, hey, turn off the show, step away, and go watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's on Netflix. Go watch it right now. And then if you're listening to this like months, even years after the fact, and it's not on Netflix anymore, sorry. But I'm
It's
sure
always
Google
streaming
is still a
somewhere.
thing.
Yeah, it's always streaming somewhere.
Exactly. So get on that. We'll be here. We will be right here waiting for you to get back. Uh, but until then, Monty Python and the Holy Grail is my number 9. And everybody should, even if you have seen it before, it's okay. Pause the show, come back when you're done watching it and having some laughs, and then go, yeah, I remember that. All right, guys, what's Jin's number 9?
Just by way of small anecdote, although I'll get there when I get there. Uh, one Christmas, my kids and I actually did the skit for Constitutional Peasant as a little play for the rest of my family. That's how much we love this movie. So, yes, the near and dear to my heart. Okay, my number 9. My number 9 my number 9 is one of those movies that makes me cringe now when I see it, but I can't help but put it on the list because I definitely still watch it. It's called The Jerk. It is a Steve Martin movie uh, that is frankly ridiculous. And honestly, I don't think that this movie would ever get made today. I feel like it is probably one of the it's probably one of the movies that made me realize the word cringe before I even identified the word cringe later in my life. Uh because it is just the comedy is like it sort of makes you uncomfortable. And I mean sort of I use that in a rather constrained way. It really should actually make you feel uncomfortable. So okay, let me get to the basically how this sort of works. The Jerk was directed by Carl Reiner, who has much fame in directing many movies. And he clearly knew what he was doing with Steve Martin. Steve Martin's again, that much like well, I guess I won't compare the two. I will just say that Steve Martin has his own impeccable sense of comedic timing, and it often feels offbeat and sloppy, but that is very intentional, and The Jerk absolutely captures that. And, we have moments in The Jerk where it feels like he goes from being a Gomer Pyle-esque character to being something far more in control and kind of has it all together, ultimately to find out no, he does not, and loses everything and has to, basically go back to his roots. His roots being ridiculously a poor black family in the South. Mother actually was played by Mabel King, How they convinced her to do this movie, I don't know, but amazingly they did. Bernadette Peters is in this movie, also a big name in the 70s and even in the 80s. Um, a very, I would say, well-rounded cast. Um, I, I guess, you know, the big thing with The Jerk is that the tagline goes something like "rags to riches to rags" or something, um, and yet it's not really that. It's actually the story of a guy who just gets so full of himself that he forgets who he is, and that's sort of the heart of everything. But in between it, there are so many ridiculous one-liners, so many idiotic sort of slapstick, quasi physical comedy encounters, and it just somehow all comes together and works. And I think part of the reason that this works so well is that you can really feel that the actors in this movie absolutely needed to maintain that deadpan composure. And I can't even imagine how hard it was based on the comedy that's there. So, I mean, of all the Steve Martin movies, this is probably one of my more favorites. There is something that is just joyful to watch when you see this. And it's kind of laugh out loud material. I think the only other one that kind of comes up for me, which isn't, I don't think, a 70s movie, is Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. That's the only other one that kind of rivals my Steve Martin. Yeah, this is an awesome kind of movie. So I highly suggest watching this movie if you haven't seen it. It definitely carries some ridiculousness with it, but the center of it is just comedic gold. It's just absolutely hilarious. I often find myself watching this particular movie when I don't feel good because it always makes me feel better. So, number 9, The Jerk with Steve Martin and Bernadette Peters.
That is a pretty good pick, I will say.
Oh, good. Have you seen it?
I might have seen it once or twice.
I would expect that that would be Josh style comedy, honestly.
It could be. It could
Yeah.
be.
Now, my next pick, I don't know so much. I debated actually whether I thought this would be a has Josh seen this or not, because I started asking around to people, "Hey, have you seen this movie?" And they knew immediately who the people were in the movie, but they had zero idea that they made a movie. So that'll be interesting. But I am jumping ahead. Let's get to your number 8 first.
You know, as much as I love to think your number 9 might be right up my alley, my number 8 might be right up yours.
Hmm.
And I kind of proud that this one actually made the list, especially considering the timing. And there was no way we could have planned this out in the way that it did. But my number 8. Oh, you feel me relishing it. My number 8 is from 1971, Cold Turkey.
Oh, I got a confession to make. I've
That
never seen
you've
that
only
movie.
seen it like a million times.
I've never seen that movie.
You've never seen it?
No.
Wow.
I know. Are you having a me moment? You're having a me moment.
If you
You're
can see
having a
my
moment
face.
where where I'm like, Josh, you never saw that movie? Oh my god. Yes, I understand the bewilderment, but no, I've never seen that movie.
Do you know what it is?
Hmm. I do.
All right.
But for some reason, I've never seen it. I don't know why.
Well, it's on Amazon Prime, so you
I
can
suppose I
check it
should
out.
get going.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely should. Stars Dick Van Dyke, Bob Newhart's in there as well. Two guys that, you know, no strangers to this show. I'd like to think, and it is so good. It is one of those movies where every time you hear about a remake, people start screaming from the bleachers, "That's dumb, no remakes, blah, blah, blah." I look at Cold Turkey and I think, you know what? They could redo this. They could update it and it would still be really good. Anyway,
Mm.
I'm getting ahead of myself because for those of you listening at home, you probably, if you're like Jen, haven't seen it. Uh,
I do know this movie. I haven't seen it, but I do know it. So I know what it's about. I know what is sort of going on. And of course, I absolutely love Dick Van Dyke and Bob Newhart. Absolutely.
Fine. Thought I could just have this one moment, but maybe
And
I was
and
pushing a
also
little hard.
I do feel like I should have seen it because this of all movies is one of those movies that definitely squarely fits into uh satirical black comedy. And like I actually feel embarrassed that I haven't seen it.
I'll stop laying it on thick and just tell the people. One, the reason why the timing could not be more appropriate, strangely and coincidentally enough, directed by Norman Lear.
Right.
May he rest in whatever power that he believed in. The reason though that I think this could work updated for today is because the plot is essentially Dick Van Dyke plays Reverend Brooks, who convinces his town in 1971. So of course the good Reverend in a small town is going to be a leader. He convinces the small town to give up smoking because a cigarette company has decided if any town can completely 100% give up smoking, they will give them something like $25,000. Give the town that much money. And I'm not sure what that is in today's money, but it's considerably more, I'm sure. So the hilarity that ensues, and not to mention the the satire, the political humor of the time being seamlessly floated in there as it's strangely enough, I'm not going to do spoilers for a movie that's 52 years old, but uh, let's just say that there are some things that you'll find very distressing as it reminds you of stuff that happens today, and some things where you go, I can't believe they got away with that back then. As far as the things that they sort of poke fun at. But Cold Turkey is a wonderful comedy, and someone once wrote in a review, it's a shame that Norman Lear didn't direct so much more. And after watching Cold Turkey, I completely agree. He has a wonderful eye for comedy, and maybe it's because he is a comedic genius and gave us the greatest, well, some of the greatest television shows of all time. But Cold Turkey is one that deserves to be on everybody's watch list. If you haven't seen it, you can, like I said, you can find it on Amazon Prime and Tubi if you're into that. Cold Turkey is my number 8.
I do know that this is a good movie. I mean, like I've seen enough of it that I totally agree it's a good movie. I just need to sit down and watch it. Ah, good choice. Very good choice. Also, thank you for calling me out on that because I probably needed that. Okay, my number 8. My number 8 is there's sort of no way to sugarcoat the ridiculousness of my number 8 choice. But it really started an entire revolution, if you will. And I'm gonna mention one thing about this comedic duo. They back before we had streaming partners that we could just hop up and or whip up a comedy special, we had comedic albums, actual albums of just comedy. And in order to sort of do that, it really required both comedic timing, but also kind of a sense of what would be visually the equivalent of hearing it. And then you have to kind of figure that out. You'd have to create these auditory cues that would make it sound like you were there, but at the same time, you didn't have to be there. Is It's an interesting kind of concept. And I think, maybe that's the best way to describe it. It was definitely a concept album, and most comedic albums were concept albums. um but the way that we would, well, not the way we would, but the way that like my parents would listen to these comedy albums was really different from the way that they would listen to almost anything else. And I can remember having this particular duo in the background at one point, with my mom and my dad listening to it, and thinking, did they know I was in the room? Like, am I supposed to be hearing this? I mean, this is funny, but am I supposed to be thinking that this is funny? Like, I was afraid to laugh. And I had this feeling much later when I actually watched the movie with this particular duo. I won't say their name just yet because I'm that's going to ruin it. And I felt the same way, like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't really be watching this because, is this bad? But it was so funny. It was absolutely so funny. So, without further ado, it is the name of the movie is called Up in Smoke. The duo that I'm talking about are Cheech and Chong, and I have to say that this particular film, of all the films that I have seen, sort of come together, um, is sort of one of the silliest and one of the goofiest. But but that's all the glamour, right? All the glamour of this movie is that it is so silly and so incredibly, um you just feel that sense of this is where stoner culture sort of came from. And there's in my estimation, this movie actually gave voice, if you will, to a lot of kind of to the silliness that I think the world kind of wanted at the time, but maybe didn't really know if it would be acceptable. Now, this movie did not do well when it first came out. It panned when it first came out. I mean, critics thought it was ridiculous and what are you doing, and you know, moral blathering this and moral blathering that. But it did fairly well at the box office. People really did like it. And since then, it's absolutely a cult classic. So, I mean, everybody knows when you are talking about comedy, everybody knows, Cheech and Chong sort of paved a road in comedy that I don't think we would have some of the acts that we have today if we didn't have this. I can't even imagine the movie Dumb and Dumber being as successful as it was without the origins of Up in Smoke as sort of, a precursor. So, the movie, sort of at its core, is just a comedy of errors, and it's all a comedy of errors around marijuana and being caught and making choices and maybe not even understanding what those choices are. There's a fair amount of LSD that was involved, but there is so much comedy in this movie that it's hard to even explain. I will say this though. I watched this with my Gen Z kid who truly didn't get most of the humor. And I think I didn't understand why that kid didn't get the humor until I realized that a lot of it is very sort of cultural centric, or culture centric, I should say, not cultural centric. And that culture centric piece is important, but I also think that, once I explained just little bits of it, they did find it very funny. So it might take watching this with, a Gen X or, God forbid, a boomer, and you might find it even funnier than you would if you just watched it out of the box. One thing that I'll say about this movie that and the reason that it made my list is because like I can watch this movie again and again and I never get tired of watching silly people do silly things. Now, not that there isn't room for more intellectual comedy which is sort of takes up a bit more of the upper part of my list, but in terms of just watching Stacy Keach be the hilarious sergeant, in terms of watching Strother Martin sort of do his bit. They're all amazing characters inside of what you feel like is this who you are or is this who you are? Like it's hard. At some point, it became really difficult to even separate Cheech and Chong from who they were on screen to who they were in real life. Like it felt like, the two must be exactly the same. I don't think that's true, but it's a very interesting sort of thing that happened with them. And the other thing that I will say also about this movie is overall this movie is definitely one of those. Could this movie be made now? No. No, it could not be made now. But is this sort of like the exact thing that typifies this particular period of time? Absolutely. This is 100% a 70s comedy piece. And it's aged, I think, very well in the sense that the humor is still the humor. It's still very good. So, my number 8, Up in Smoke with Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong. And I want to say that this movie was released in like the late 70s. I guess I'm going to say like 78, 79. I think it was 78. Have you
Very good.
seen that movie?
I may have seen it once or twice.
Ah, okay. Did you think it was funny? That's the big key.
It depends on which time I was watching it and the circumstances of my mental state.
Ah, I mean, honestly, the best time to watch Up in Smoke is when you are in altered states because you can truly embrace just the absolute silly giddiness of it. But if you don't imbibe in those altered states, you can still find it enjoyable. All right, move on to number 7.
Number 7, and I know there's a lot of sports ball fans out there, and I don't mean to disappoint you, but
Well, that's okay because foosball is from the devil.
it is from the devil.
Okay, wait, that was a different era and a totally different Adam Sandler time. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
My selection for number 7 is, in fact, a sports ball movie, but it doesn't have balls,
Oh,
which is kind of weird for the 70s.
it is very weird.
No, my number 7 is all about not America's pastime, more like Canada's pastime. Am I right?
Was
Well,
that rolling maple syrup?
or curling, I guess.
Oh,
Hmm.
curling. Yeah.
1970s sports movie about curling. That's my number 7. It,
I would
it's
watch
called
that.
it's called Sweep the. the- Okay, it's Slapshot. Slapshot is my number 7. It it takes the 1977 takes the formula, if you will, of these you know down and out uh, athletes, and they're underdogs. They got nothing they can't do nothing right, and then they get awesome. Would that be a pretty accurate description?
Yes, actually, I think that is pretty accurate.
It's a story that you've seen many, 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 many times. And in fact, there is a whole subgenre of sports movie about those not lovable underdogs, because who cares about lovable underdogs? These your underdogs have to be from the wrong side of the tracks. They have to be full of spit and vinegar, and you really shouldn't want to cheer them on for their antics, but at the end of the day, they're just so darn funny, and you get so many good moments and scenes. You can't you can't help but pull for Paul Newman and company, as they do what they do. Slapshot is the precursor to many a sport film, uh, too numerous to really get into it. And I already did say it's something we've seen many, many times, but it was different for this one. Maybe it's because it was sort of towards the beginning of the trend in these types of films. Maybe it was the fact that it was unabashedly adult in its use of the formula that made it so appealing, that made it so funny. After all, when kids do it, it's yeah, it's funny. But using those underdog sports stories for grown-ups, where they all do grown-up things, you're kind of working on a whole new level there. Slapshot, directed by George Roy Hill, will go down in history as probably the greatest hockey movie ever. Sorry, Miracle.
Huh.
It is one that, if you love hockey, you've already seen it. If you love sports movies, you've probably already seen it. If you love Paul Newman, yeah, you've definitely seen it. But if none of those match you as a descriptor, then by all means, if you haven't checked it out, check it out, because you will eventually be one of those things because of this movie. Uh, Slapshot is my number 7. Thank you for your time.
Oh, that was really good, actually, and also that is a. I think that that's a super good movie. So good choice, very good choice.
Thank you.
Okay, my number 7 is a movie that I wish I could have put way further up on my list. But honestly, there were just too many good ones, and I it fell to the bottom. Sorry. I will watch this movie every single Saturday that there is a Saturday for the rest of my life, and sometimes even do. I oftentimes watch this particular movie before I watch a creature feature, and I don't even know why that is. I think I must have seen it once at one of the creature feature double features at like one of our movie. We used to have these. I'm a kid of the '80s. Okay, so we used to have these movie houses where we would pay um, $2, sometimes 3.50, and my mom would gladly give us that money to go get out of the house for the day. And we would go to this local theater, and at the local theater, we would have a double feature. And oftentimes, the double feature on the weekend was a creature feature. It was two Godzilla movies, or a Godzilla movie and something older, like Creature from the Black Lagoon, or it was, like whatever monster movie was sort of like the a Frankenstein movie. I remember seeing one of those, and whatever it was, the creature features were really popular. And for some reason, this particular one snuck in there at some point, and I don't even know why, but I fell in love with it. And I used this line. I think there's a line in the movie that I used. Like every single time I needed to have something funny, I would use this line and hope that somebody else got it. I think it was how I've ultimately decided whether people were cool or not. Have you seen this movie? Well, then you'll know this line. It's Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Now, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is, at this point, probably far more of a cult classic than it ever could have imagined that it would have been at the time. Um, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is basically the story of, what can I say, Killer Tomatoes. Um, and it is not exactly conventional in the sense that I think that people were thinking that it was something a little bit different than it was. Um, but how can I even say? I need to reconstruct that sentence. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, I think people thought was going to be something simple. And it ended up not being simple. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes actually ended up being quite an interesting um, study, if you will, of uh, how we look at it's the comedy of how we look at the um, the oversimplicity that we sort of give to our solutions. That's kind of the basic. Um, it is it's schlock. I mean, the movie is just absolutely schlock, but it's so fun. Um, there are, and I mean, when you read the tagline, you kind of get the feeling that you that it's so sublime that, like, how could anybody take it seriously? After a wave of reports of mysterious attacks involving people and pets being eaten by traditionally docile fruit, not domicile, docile fruit, a special government task force is set up to investigate the violent fruit and put a stop to their murderous spree. I mean, that sounds pretty ridiculous, and honestly, all the way through, it absolutely is ridiculous. But there's also this sort of like sublime metaphor underneath, which definitely is where the dark comedy gets attached to. And it really is about how inept we are at figuring out even the most basic of problems. And how no matter how much we sort of think we can see into a problem, oftentimes the problem is us. We don't see it for what it is. Um, and so it becomes, yeah, it does become just really ridiculously this is one of the few movies where I think that the sublime aspect of this movie is actually better than the top comedy part of it. The more that you read into this movie, the funnier that it gets. And I just, again, I can't speak highly enough about it. It's just so funny. There's musical numbers. There's a little tiny element of horror. There's lots of sci-fi, even if it's ridiculous. And a healthy measure of adventure thrown in. You can't go wrong with Attack of the Killer Tomatoes if you are looking for a 70s feel movie and when I say feel, because it makes you feel all kinds of things, um, that just sort of like throws everything, including the kitchen sink, into a movie, and you come up with something so ridiculous that it actually works. I mean, it's insane in its inception, but that's part of its magic. Is it just absolutely succeeds because of its insanity. Um, Again, I love this movie so much. I don't know if I can say anything more about it that isn't sort of already out there, part of the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes ethos. But let me just say, if you haven't seen it, you should definitely watch it. It's definitely, a walk backwards in time. I mean, the effects are ridiculously silly. You got people dressing up as killer tomatoes. You got, kind of like odd on-screen animation that doesn't even quite work, but it still somehow lends itself to the whole movie being just ridiculous. And so, yeah, it works. So, number 7, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Another movie that's made its way onto a few of my lists over
I
the
love this movie
years.
so much.
I keep thinking, wow, we have been doing this for a little while, haven't we?
Yeah,
Seems like
actually,
only yesterday.
one of the taglines of this movie was actually just this. You ready?
Mhm.
Arg!
That's an
That
accurate
was
description.
that was a tagline. My favorite line in this whole movie was okay, so you got the guy who's infiltrating the Killer Tomatoes, trying to pretend that he's one of the Killer Tomatoes, and they're eating, and he mistakenly says, "Can someone please pass the ketchup?" And I mean, honestly, I use that line forever and a day to sort of see, did you get it? Did you get it? Because if you did, then you can be my friend. So yeah, loved it. Just absolutely loved it.
Well, I guess we're moving on to my number six.
We're moving on to your number six. We're getting up there.
Now, if I could really think of 10 specific films that have done this, I would uh, I would pitch a whole episode around the idea.
Mm.
But I don't want to count cartoons in
Oh.
that for that idea, because after all, especially in the 80s, there were a lot of especially R-rated films being turned into children's cartoons. RoboCop, Rambo come to mind just off the top of my head. Toy lines, craziness, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of a film making the jump to the small screen does fascinate me. And one, because usually it goes the other way. It's like we're going to make a movie out of the TV show because the TV show was a stepping stone to box office. That's
Mm.
kind of a more instant, you know, for lack of a better term, cash grab. But when this particular film made the jump uh, to television, it ruffled a few feathers and instantly became a classic TV show.
Ooh, I think I know what you're talking about.
No doubt remembered even more than the movie itself.
Uh-huh.
But the movie itself is still wonderful. Directed by Robert Altman. It is 1970s MASH.
Mm. Very good movie.
A lot of people either forget or just didn't know that it was a movie first, which is not surprising because it's a movie that over the years has been overshadowed by the show, kind of playing second fiddle, if you will. But it was it was a lot more of an in your face gritty look. And don't get me wrong, it's still hilarious. Donald Sutherland and Elliot Gould um, do amazing work playing the leads. But this was not this this ain't your daddy's mash, even though it is. It's a very it's not TV. I'll just put it that way. It's not TV. It's a more adult look at uh, the 4077. There are some terms used in the movie that you know while accurate for the time, just would not carry over to today or as we saw through the transition to television, just doesn't work well for general audiences. The humor does have the same dark tones, but in the movie they're more in the show they're like dark undertones and the idea that war is hell, but it can be a martini and I'll be fine. And in the movie, they're very much overt, as they don't have the time to draw it out as the TV show. I honestly, I did not mean to just walk into my number 6 going, "Well, we're just gonna compare this to the TV show, and that's going to be my talk on MASH." No, that wasn't that wasn't the the plan. But I just started thinking most people are gonna know the TV show, and it's gonna get that direct comparison if I'm talking about the movie. So, what you really need to know is that it's darker, and you'll see some storylines that were not, um, done, or you'll see some characters behaving in, very similar ways, but because of the format, maybe it's just they didn't have the time uh, to open up each character as they did later on. MASH is a movie that is definitely worth watching, especially if you're a fan of the show. And I'm going to go ahead and say it's also a series of books worth reading. Yeah, this movie podcast just said read a book. You can't go wrong putting words in your brain. So, MASH is my number 6. With a bullet, I guess. Sorry, I'm trying to try to come up with a good button for that, but no, just MASH is my number 6.
I I think you're right though. I think that the movie that was MASH inspired the TV series, and the TV series took off in a way that that personally, obviously, I mean, for very obvious reasons, it became sort of synonymous to what people had were experiencing or had just experienced with the Vietnam War. And so, although the horrors of war, are sort of universal, the things that were happening there were quite a bit different, just in the sense that, it was a bit more removed via time. And so they had sort of uh, an opportunity to explore things that I don't think that we normally would be able to explore. But the way that they did it with this sense of dark humor, and honestly just some of the best slapstick comedy I've seen in forever. Um, it it somehow captured a moment in time that wouldn't have been possible if it hadn't been for the movie. And the movie does stand by itself, but the movie stands by itself, I think, as sort of the jumping off point for the series, and that's where it had the most cultural impact. Had there been no series called MASH, I don't know necessarily if we would be talking about this particular movie, because even though I think it can stand on its own, I think it loses something without the series behind it, simply because those characters were not nearly as developed as the TV characters, for obvious reasons. I mean, there's lots of time, there's, an effort put into creating character arcs, especially Hawkeye. So, but very good choice.
Thank you. It is interesting to think that if the series didn't come along, that maybe it would have just fallen off as, oh, that's there are a lot of movies, especially on the show, that come up where you look at the cast and you see these, amazing names. This one in particular, Donald Sutherland, Elliot Gould, Robert Duvall. Uh, you know, the list goes on and on. But to think that this particular piece wouldn't have, had the staying power if it wasn't for the like all-time greatest TV show,
Mhm.
um, in a lot of people's opinions, uh, kind of not only catching the light but shining some back on it.
Yeah, I think that that's really. I mean, I think that observation is very true, and we have very there's very few examples of this that exist in movie TV crossover history. Well, sometimes the movie is good enough to warrant us going, "Oh, yeah, we should make a TV series out of this." Hannibal is a good example. The Hannibal Lecter series of movies spun a Brian Fuller TV series, which was absolutely astounding. I mean, just like, whew, we'll have to get into that someday. Um, but without the Hannibal movies, if we just had, Thomas Harris's books, I don't think that Brian Fuller would have been like, "Oh yeah, I think I could really do something special with this." There's something there's something interesting about that parallel which we don't get to talk about a lot, but I think is definitely a part of film TV crossover culture. So, yeah, that was really good. Well, my number 6 is, and yeah, I wish that this person came up more in my list, for comedies in the '70s because I feel like they're just such an integral part of it. Um, but this particular movie is one of my most favorite, with this particular director slash writer slash movie star. In fact, he did all of them in this movie, and it kind of shows because there is definitely a sort of brilliance that comes from Mel Brooks, which you cannot quash. It's just there. This movie is called High Anxiety. High Anxiety, I think, is one of my favorite Mel Brooks productions for a number of different reasons. One of them is just the pure unflinching look that he decided to sort of take on mental health altogether. And wow, I mean, mental health, if you think mental health is bad now, if you could have seen mental health back in the '70s, I think we would all be absolutely appalled by what we saw. It was really pretty terrible. But high anxiety kind of captures something more than just the state of uh, mental illness or any kind of mental affect. It really speaks to this sort of idea that arises from imposter syndrome. There's all kinds of these are references to things that I don't think even had a name back then, which if you watch it now you can totally see. Um, there the parts of high anxiety that really work are the parts where we just sort of see things for being as ridiculous as they are and still recognizing that while this is horrible it's also incredibly funny. And that to me is kind of always a bridge in comedy that I feel like is important, where we can look at the harshness of our world and be able to find humor in it because that's how we can cope. And that's one of, I think, the biggest through lines of high anxiety is this sort of coping mechanism that everybody finds to get by, to do what they need to do. um Mel Brooks is so funny in this movie, um that as he's trying to overcome his nervous disorder called high anxiety, um, everybody else around him is also trying to either, be of help or sort of acts as a foil to him being able to deal with his high anxiety. It's the cast is hilarious. It's got Dick Van Patten, Harvey Korman, Cloris Leachman. She's so funny. I love her. Madeline Kahn, also hilarious. People that were sort of like the who's who of comedy in the '70s all came together to make this movie. Um, I will say with a caveat, y- this is not the kind of movie to watch if you feel like if you feel like making light of certain parts of mental illness are just not something that you can stomach. Please don't watch this movie. It's not that kind of movie. It's actually it really is the kind of movie that is a little bit like Blazing Saddles. It's making fun of things that we find very objectionable, and sort of casting light on things in order to create levity of things that really are very difficult to handle. And so, again, I don't watch this movie if that's how you feel, because it's not that this movie is not for you. In some ways, I feel like this movie is sort of like, on Stars right now there is a series called Shining Veil, and it has this sort of root that I can almost pull from High Anxiety that runs right through it, and other than the supernatural stuff, but it feels really, really, really like in tune, in sync with it. So anyway, my number six, High Anxiety, and I want to say this movie is uh, it's another late '70s movie. I don't actually know the actual year that this movie was made, but I know it was late '70s.
77.
77. There we go. And I have to assume that you've seen High Anxiety.
You know, now's the point in time I have to sheepishly make like Jen earlier with cold turkey and say I haven't.
Ooh.
I mean,
Well,
there's only two Mel Brooks directed movies that I have not seen.
oh, and this is one of them.
That's one of them. The other is The
Wow.
12 Chairs.
Oh, 12 Chairs is also very funny.
I've started watching The 12 Chairs, but I've never been able to, you know, be able to watch it all the way through. Usually because something would come up, and now it's not really readily streamable. It's one of those. The 12 Chairs is a movie that you kind of really have to go out of your way to, get a hold of, because
Yeah.
it's not one of the big Brooks movies that uh, garners all the attention and therefore gets everybody wanting it on their streaming platform. It's definitely something you have to put in the work to get. While High Anxiety also not super, not up there in like the top, you know, uh, echelon of Brooks movies. Still, um, I it would just be nice to have a streaming service with like all of Mel Brooks movies. Just like
Ah,
we buy Mel Brooks, that's it, and then you get all the movies.
Turner Classic has a lot of Mel Brooks in it. I don't know. I want to say they have High Anxiety. I don't know, but I've seen a lot of Mel Brooks on Turner Classic.
Probably the actual Turner Classic and not just the selected titles for Max.
Right, right. Yes, the actual TCM. Yeah.
That makes sense. But you know what else makes sense?
What's that? Your
We've made it
number five?
to the top.
That's exciting.
And imagine there being some sort of klaxon and, a big number 5 splashed across the screen. Kind of like this. My number five is a movie, once again, that sort of kicked off a whole new type of film, a whole new type of comedy. And it was brought to us by those geniuses, those Ivy League geniuses at the National Lampoon.
Oh no, not them.
I'm talking about those troublemakers at Animal House. Now, Animal House has been, mentioned on the show before. I'll be brief. But when it comes to movies where it's, these this group of unsightly, unkempt party animals that are giving the dean trouble. Uh, this is the originator. This is the standard to this day because nobody does it better. When it comes to just, this is a future list, possibly um, top 10 movies where the comedic leads, I guess in this case, have problems with authority. This comes to mind: Police Academy, things like that, where the people in charge will say, the name in a kind of way.
Yeah.
And it all came about from here, directed by John Landis, which kicked off his career. There's a whole movie about, well, some of it's about making this movie. There's a movie about the National Lampoon. Oh gosh, I just had it in my head and I don't remember what it was called. I'll probably insert the graphic here, and this is what it's called. Boom. So, Animal House is, if we're gonna be fair, a great movie, yes, but when it comes to aging, some things some things aren't exactly future proof. There are some moments in the movie where you kind of have to question, like, wait, this was okay in the 70s?
I find myself asking that about a lot of these movies.
I rewatched some John Hughes movies and I'm like, this is this is classic.
Hmm.
This is so bad. Not bad in quality, but bad in, oh my god, what is the message here? And Animal House does kind of fall into that camp, as maybe it didn't age well. So while it isn't, I hate to do this, it just cannot have the term timeless attached to it. If you can put yourself in the mindset somehow, some way of uh, just realizing that it is at the same time a product of its time, uh, before its time, but also behind the times, all at once. This is still a movie you can enjoy very much. The questionable scenes aren't, they don't take up the majority of the movie by any means. So you can still enjoy a food fight and things of that nature. But without this movie, there is no Police Academy. There's no Revenge of the Nerds. There's, again, movies that might not get the timeless tag. I think what I'm saying is, if you can enjoy it for what it is, and I know some people don't like that term, you'll have a great time. But if you find that some of your, uh, I hate to put it like this, but if some of your sensibilities are uh, just strictly modern and you have no taste for old humor, I'm not even gonna say classic. Just it's old, it's aged.
Hmm.
Then you might want to avoid. So that's the little disclaimer there. But Animal House is my number 5 because of just the sheer impact that it had on Hollywood, on cinema, since it's released, is still being felt today, and it deserves recognition for one of the best comedies of the 1970s.
Yeah, I definitely think that Animal House is very culturally significant. Um, I also think that what what you're looking for when you're talking about this is it isn't that people don't want to, or maybe upset by different types of comedy. It's that it's I think that it's the understanding that this was acceptable at one time, and then a lot like my Gen Z kid, that you don't quite understand why it is culturally relevant, or you don't get the humor. And so when you're looking at the humor because you don't get the cultural context, you're just looking at, why is that funny? That doesn't seem funny, that just seems mean, or that just doesn't seem. And a lot of it has to do with cultural cues and context, and I think that that is one of the reasons that certain humor doesn't always age as well as other humor. It just becomes a little bit more difficult to sort of understand. So it's not that people are being offended for no good reason, it's that they just don't have the contextual cues to get it, and so it feels more offensive than perhaps it actually is. Now, having said that, Animal House is the beginner, the starting point, the foundation of 1,000 tropes. And I think that just for the sheer volume of that, it becomes kind of important. But it isn't for everybody. But I feel like the same is true for humor today too. Not all humor is applicable to every person. We all find different things funny. We all have different thresholds for what we deem to be, funny, or that we want to embrace as being funny. So, yeah, you're totally valid.
Thank you.
Okay, well, my number 5, and this is not because it's coming up on the holiday season, it's because I just genuinely love this movie, and it was created as a musical slash, again, dark comedy. Now, the dark comedy part of this uh happens to come from the retelling or the adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, or Scrooge. The name of the movie is called Scrooge. It was released in 1970. It is it is one of the most interesting adaptations for Scrooge that I have seen ever, and that says a lot because I pride myself on seeing every single one of the adaptations that I can. I even did a paper on the differences between how we tell the Scrooge story and where we kind of are culturally, because each decade that goes by, we sort of add different emphasis to different parts of the story, and it kind of tells us a lot about where we are. It's a lot like Robin Hood or King Arthur. Excuse me. so, so I chose this story because it makes fun of the most complicated parts of Dickens's story. It makes fun of Ebenezer Scrooge as the miser by basically having the entire town sing this song, which actually won Best Original Score at the Academy Awards, called "Thank You Very Much," right? And Scrooge is there to witness this, but doesn't realize that they're all singing "Thank you very much" because he died, right? And so even all the rest of the film actually kind of runs around this very same premise, where there is this sort of wonderful, almost amazing sense of comedy in the darkest of things that Scrooge has done, or is experiencing at the moment. And it's it's actually quite brilliant. I found it to be just absolutely very cool. Um, I will say that the music in this is delightful. I sing every single song. I absolutely love that. But I think the underlying part of this that makes it so good as a comedy is by the time that you get to the end, there is not just a like a resolution in what we all know as the Scrooge story, which is redemption. There is an absolute joy. And that joy can only come about the by the humor that is built up throughout the rest of the film. So although, this time of year it's always a great time to have a holiday film, this one really does fit. So my number 5, the 1970 musical called Scrooge, absolutely perfect if you haven't seen it. It's really worth watching. It's just absolutely beautiful. Love it, love it, love it, love it. And also it stars Albert Finney. I don't know how you can go wrong with Albert Finney. Alec Guinness is Jacob Marley's ghost.
Sounds like they went hard on this one.
Is so just it's such a good all of this movie altogether is just such a it's just such a it's not just like a good adaptation, it's like a great spin on what I think Dickens really wanted people to see. And like we were just talking about, each era kind of does something a little bit different. And then in the 1970s, we were experiencing, I think, a lot of things that we weren't really doing a good job of expressing. And this movie sort of takes that premise of, hey, you're really not articulating what you should be articulating, and turns it on its head and says, well, here you go. Let me just sing you the song of why this is the way it is, and you'll get it. And it really did work.
I haven't seen this.
Oh, you really should see it. I mean, it really, although, like, I had to buy it from Amazon Prime. This was many years ago. I don't know where it might be now, but it's really, it, I feel like of all the adaptations of Scrooge that we have, this one is perhaps the most joyous. And that's what I want to feel at Christmas time. I want to feel joyous. I also want to feel entertained by a movie, and this movie definitely does that. And Albert Finney's one-liners are just, I mean, they're hilarious. His interaction with the Ghost of Christmas Present is just, it's gold. It's hilariously gold. So it definitely is worth, the $3.99 that it costs on Amazon.
Or, as my research has just panned out, I can watch it on Paramount Plus.
Oh, there you go. Nice. Nice, nice,
And
nice.
since it is the season, sorry for the dating of the episode here. It is December. It fits very snugly in with my um, um, holiday movie marathon. There, I said those words.
I have those too.
Words.
A Dragon for Christmas may be on that list. No,
Uh,
holiday marathons.
we should
Movie.
we should do that sometime.
Yeah, we should. We definitely should.
So we're gonna move on to my number four.
We are moving on to number 4.
Number four. I think I can say this unabashedly. Is that the second time I used that word tonight?
I think it is.
Okay, I think I can say this without hesitation that my number four is in the top. It is in the top 2 road movies of all time.
Hmm.
It is literally one of the best movies ever made.
Wow.
And it's funny that you mentioned Scrooge because uh, the cast of this movie also did a take on A Christmas Carol because they love working together.
Is it the Muppets?
It's the Muppet movie.
Oh. Egged it. Also one of my favorite Christmas Carol adaptations.
Oh, it's so wonderful. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the Muppet movie
The Muppet Movie.
where Kermit the Frog just is hanging out in the swamp, and a Hollywood agent says, you know, basically, you should be in pictures, and Kermit's like, maybe. And
Oh,
thus
so like,
begins the road trip.
is it like the Beverly Hillbillies but for frogs in the swamp?
Yeah, just like
Oh,
that.
okay. Yeah, I
But
could get into
instead of
that.
bubbling crude, it's the Rainbow Connection. A banger if there ever was one. That's what the kids say, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, what is the Muppet movie? The Muppet movie is a movie by Muppets for Muppets and people, and tells the story of Kermit, going to Hollywood, meeting, all of his Muppet friends along the way, riding in a Studebaker with Fozzie and Gonzo and Camilla as they make their way across the country to seek fame and fortune. It is a it's a joyous film that didn't have the right. It had no right to be made with the sincerity that it was made with. It
Mhm.
had no right to be made with the beautiful eye for framing and cinematography that it got. It had no right having a great soundtrack filled with amazing songs because, you know, let's face it, surface level, it's a movie about puppets. But no, they defied all logic, they defied all reason and said, "We're not making a puppet movie, we're making a movie. The stars are Muppets, and we're going to do it straight." And they did. Kermit's a charismatic leading frog. And as silly as that sounds to say or hear, it's absolutely true. Fozzie and Gonzo bring out uh, different types of silly humor, but they are still characters with uh, with a little bit of depth, as it shows through not just their ability to deliver zingers, but also through their empathy for their friend and each other as the journey gets rough. These are not just two-dimensional, you know, live action cartoons, if you will. They are fleshed out, so to speak. Felt it out? Anyway, okay, I'll stop. They are they're fully realized characters with emotion and story and just an intangible quality that makes them come to life in a way that nobody but the Muppets can really pull off. I never sit there questioning, whether or not, oh, is there, what's the person doing underneath Kermit? Kermit the Frog is not Kermit the Frog is not seen as a guy with his hand up a frog's butt, right? Kermit the Frog is a celebrity. Miss Piggy is a celebrity, not the people that portray them, but the characters themselves are the famous ones. I was watching the Game Awards. Guess who made a cameo? Gonzo.
Ooh.
Not it wasn't, you know, oh, I played Gonzo. It was Gonzo. Gonzo did a guest spot at the Game Awards because Gonzo's a celebrity. This is the only time in I can think of, and I do tie, the Sesame Street crew to the Muppets, um, for this ability to, make these characters real. But these are the only this is the only time I can think of to where you you see people just fully embrace the new reality they're given when one of these characters show up. The reality that Kermit the Frog is Kermit the Frog is 100% accepted into our own. And it's because of this great movie. It was able to pull off such a heart-filled road trip, and had I had no qualms believing in what's the word I'm looking for? Being immersed in their world. The Muppet movie is genius on many levels, all the levels, and one of the greatest movies of all time. Not just one of the best movies of the 1970s. And yes, it's my number four. For reasons will, you know, are irrelevant. It's just where it landed on my list. I'm not saying that I don't make judgmental calls based. What I'm trying to say is it's a great movie. It's a great movie. It's my number four. I've talked about it too long as it is. The Muppet movie is my number four.
I can feel your passion for our quasi, although not human, definitely more human than most humans kind of characters. And absolutely feel it too. We in our yearly stint of watching all of our holiday movies watched A Muppet's Christmas Carol, and absolutely felt that the 100% same way. It The characters are the characters. They're not extensions of humans playing the characters. They are who they are. So it would be no different than introducing Tom Cruise than it would be to introduce Kermit the Frog. And yeah, I think most of us feel that way. Also, I have to say that the Muppet movie was one of the first movies that I can remember seeing as a kid, thinking, I know those people, like as if they were actually real people. So yeah.
Exactly, and
Yep.
that's why the Muppets. I said it at the beginning of my my rant, my rave. I said it at the top. This cast did a version of the Christmas Carol I did because when you look at the Muppets Christmas Carol, it's Kermit the Frog is in that movie. Period. That's the billing because that is what the buy-in is, and it's so easy to see that these are just characters, uh,
Hmm.
real characters, and not a lot of. I mean, there's some would say that a movie like that is very it's on the meta chart where it's a guy playing a character playing another character, you know Tropic Thunder ish. When it comes to puppeteers and the character that they're playing, and the character that character is portraying. But no, no, it's with the Muppets, it's streamlined. Kermit the Frog, done.
Right.
Movies star the Muppets, done.
Yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree.
So I'm gonna get off my pedestal, or my soapbox, and I'll just step down and let you carry on with your number four.
Well, my number four could not be further away from the levity of the Muppets, although still a very dark comedy, which I absolutely love. I actually read this book after I saw the movie because I didn't even know that the book existed until I saw the movie. And then I thought, what the heck did I just watch? And the book is actually even more sublime than the movie was. So, yeah, be prepared. The movie is called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now, if you don't know what this story is about, you probably know the name Nurse Ratchet, which is one of the sort of I, I I I mean, she's not a titular character, but she is so incredibly inextricably woven with the story, that you kind of, when you hear it, that's who you probably think of. And One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is it's I'm gonna struggle with this one. So there's a lot of things that are happening in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's I mean, they pen it as a psychological drama, but it's not a psychological drama in the sense that it is actually dark comedy. And the reason that it is such dark comedy is because if you're watching what the characters are doing, they are absolutely making a comedic show out of the absolute lack of power that they have. And the incredible overarching sense of just their experience being um, not just out of their control, but also, I think, in some ways, so far down a rabbit hole that the only thing that they can do is sort of find their own moments of levity, their own sort of feelings of, when comedy is comedy, it's really comedy. And they go to great lengths to try to create that pervasive sense of, that pervasive experience, because that's the only way that they can experience this. It's weird. I've seen this movie sort of labeled in a number of different ways, but I've always thought of it as dark comedy. And after I read the book, I was even more um, moved in that direction. So let me give you just sort of like a basic. Um, there's a character. His name is Randy McMurphy. He is he's on a work farm, and he was put there for basically having sex with a 15-year-old girl, so statutory rape. Um, he has other arrests, and he's trying to get out of trouble, so he pretends to be insane because he thinks that they are going to basically put him to work at hard labor. Now, before you get upset with that premise, just realize that, sort of all's well that ends well. By the time that this movie is done, you kind of get there's been karmic justice happening here. Um, there's a bunch of other patients at this place, and there is the nurse who is Nurse Ratchet, and she sees McMurphy as being sort of a threat to her law and order in the unit, and she goes to great lengths to try to quash it as much as she can. She takes away all their privileges. She takes away their things. She, whatever she can do. But it becomes kind of at the end, it sort of, or not the end, but throughout the movie, it becomes a contest of wills, and it's funny. There's so much in here that actually ends up being hilarious, and a lot of it is at the expense of Nurse Ratched, and a lot of it is at the expense of some of the other um, patients, if you will. There's a lot of super interesting dynamics that happen between the patients. Um, okay, so there are some interesting ideas about how they're going to escape, and none of those really work out. Um, in the end, this movie sort of ends on a very sour kind of a note where you realize that what sort of happens to him is obviously one of the worst things that could happen. And I won't say what that is, just in case you want to watch the movie, but it it involves an actual procedure that happened back in they used to do this. They used to do this to patients. Now, one thing that one thing that I'll say about this movie that makes me choose it for this list is, again, sublime humor is often, we sometimes discard it as not being real humor, or not being, there's, like, we don't see the levels of actual comedy in it. But to me, sublime humor, or this kind of dark comedic humor, is essentially important, especially in these particular types of movies where you almost have to have that in order to understand how incredibly difficult the subject matter is. When I read this story, I was very taken by the inner monologue of all the characters, well, of especially of McMurphy, because there is this sort of idea that you don't understand half of what's going on until you can really get into his head. And it's interesting because in the movie, that's half of what they try to do. They try to really express what the world looks like from his perspective. Now, this movie stars Jack Nicholson, before Jack Nicholson was like even more famous than he ended up being. And he does just an absolute bang up job. Louise Fletcher plays Nurse Ratched, and she also was pretty amazing. Um, I'm gonna highly suggest this movie, both for its cultural significance and for its sort of retrospective look back, much like High Anxiety, to the way that we used to treat people that were in mentally ill situations, and how absolutely horrible it was, and why we should all be cheering at least the progress that we've made so far, because it was a lot worse. A lot worse. So, my number 4 is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Excellent choice. I have seen it.
Did you like it?
Yes, I very surprised though. Um, not one that I would go to, when it comes to comedies from the
Yeah, it's not
1970s.
it's not up there, and that's what I was trying to explain, right? It's not up there as sort of like the, "Oh, this is gonna make you fall out of your chair and laugh." But it definitely has the dark satire, the true irony, the absolute, when you are looking at this film, if you understand what you're watching, and I don't mean this like in an elitist way. I mean in a, like, really try to understand when you're watching this movie what you're seeing, and it is very dark comedy. It's kind of scary comedy, actually, to me, because the themes are so incredibly difficult, and so any levity that comes out of it makes you feel incredibly icky, because, like, well, why should I feel okay about this? This is so bad.
Okay, okay. Uh, I'm not saying you're wrong. After all, you are the the brilliant one of the duo.
it does get classified as black comedy. It's just it I think that it's a lot harder to see the black comedy in it than it is to see the the drama in it. It takes a little bit of work to see the black comedy in it.
That's fair. And also a good reminder that when it comes to comedy, there is often a general feeling that it ends at, you know, falling over things and pies to the face. But it is such a wide spectrum.
Mm,
It casts such a large shadow on the world of storytelling. And I was going to say entertainment, but no, it's every type of story that it's
yeah,
very encompassing.
it is, and I think that it brings up a really good point about our entire list, and that is that for in the '70s we had comedy that today we might not even consider some of these to be as comedic as stories that we see now. Like we might see things that come out now as being funnier than the things that we saw in the '70s, and part of that is just we've culturally moved on from certain things. So there's also that aspect of it too. But you know
All
what we
right.
haven't moved on from?
Um, I
Our
I'm
list. And
yeah,
number
that's the
3,
thing we're doing.
that's the one.
Sorry, man. I was looking for Dave.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, quick break. Quick side note. Do you know that in the 1970s, Roman Polanski actually did, I think he did 2, but one that I can think of, uh, a comedy. It's actually a comedy horror. Did you know that Roman Polanski did one?
No, I didn't.
It's called The Tenant, and it didn't make my list. But just to kind of give you an idea of like what sort of black comedy slash horror stuff exists out there, even Roman Polanski jumped on this bandwagon. So that should tell you something.
It does.
Because Roman Polanski was not exactly out there just sort of making movies for the sake of making movies.
No, he was making movies to get in hot tubs with minors.
Well, other than that.
Ooh, he went there.
Ooh, speaking of things that don't fly well now, that sort of flew in the '70s.
So my number three.
So you're number 3, awkward silence. Yes, indeed.
Well, that silence was
Moving right along.
for editing purposes.
Moving right along.
Moving right along, my number three is the one that's already been brought up tonight on your list.
Hmm.
It is Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke.
Oh, all right.
I'm not going to beat this one uh, like a dead horse because you did a great job talking about its cultural impact. I will just add on, you know, it basically created an entire genre of movie that gave us the careers of like Dave Chappelle. I
Mm.
mean, let's face it, without Half Baked, there's no Dave Chappelle, right?
Yep.
It Harold and Kumar just would not be a thing. But Cheech and Chong, I think I think the funniest thing that I saw in regards to these guys recently was there's a show, a game show hosted by Kelly Ripa, um, that It's called Generation Gap, I think. And one of the things that they do, one of the segments they have is they bring on a mystery guest. I mean, the mystery isn't to the audience. We know who it is, and it's not even to the contestants. And well, I guess a little backstory here. Um, it's generally a grandparent and a grandchild team up against other similarly, age differenced family members, other families, and they get asked questions about the other's generation. So, kind of to make everyone look to make the old people look out of touch, with what's going on today, and to make the younger people look kind of dumb for not knowing their history, I guess. But, the conceit is it's supposed to be funny. And like I said, like I was saying, one of the segments they do involves, having a celebrity on screen that will not say their name, but they're on screen, they're talking like via Skype, and depending on when or which generation they're trying to ask questions to, like in one episode they try to get the grandparents to figure out who Jojo Siwa is. And that was an absolute blast to watch. Uh, but in this particular instance, they had uh, Cheech Marin on there, and then they wanted to see if the kids knew who Cheech Marin was, and of course they didn't. But the funny thing is, the clues, a couple of them were centered around. Yeah, I used to do comedy with my uh, friend Tommy Chong, and the kids are like, I don't know what that is. What does that mean?
Was that Chuck Barris at the Gong Show? Oh no, wait, that was a different show.
It's just funny then giving Cheech and Chong related clues to these kids, and I couldn't help but think, okay, if one of the kids is like, "Oh yeah, you're Cheech, I know you," are the grandparents going to be like proud, like, "Yeah, we got it right," or just like suspicious, like, "Why do you know that?"
Oh my god, that's funny.
You're getting drug tested. Sorry, just a little non sequitur. I mean, it's tangentially related in a way. It has nothing to do with the movie, really. Point is, I found something to say about the movie that you hadn't, even though it wasn't about the movie. But I'm still going to chalk it up as a win. Up in
Hey,
Smoke, number 3.
there you go. Honestly, the fact that we both chose this for our list says something pretty awesome about both of us. So, yeah. Uh, okay, my number three. My number three is one of those movies that is also delightfully, what's a good word for this? Delightfully innocent, but at the same time also nefariously uh, just nefarious. Maybe that's a good way to say it. Um, it stars Tatum O'Neal and Ryan O'Neal. It also stars Madeline Kahn, who seems to make her debut into my list often with the '70s shows. Um, and the movie is called Paper Moon. Now, if you don't know what Paper Moon is about, it's about this con man who ends up having to take care of this little girl. And he basically is sort of surprised by the fact that she can kind of out con the con. Um, it's it's quite exceptionally good. There are many little pieces in this movie that kind of first of all, it's really funny. I mean, everything that happens in this movie is funny. One of the funniest scenes that I can think of is the scene um, where Tatum O'Neal's character goes into a store and buys something and then basically argues with the clerk that she didn't get the right amount of change. And by the time that she's done, she hasn't just gotten the amount of change that she wanted back, but she also got her original bill back, which is also hilarious. The whole movie is just super funny. Um, there's a lot of um, there's a lot of sort of cultural throwback pieces in here to the Great Depression and what things were sort of like, but also how the existence of being together with people can really change the course of your life. Even con men who end up being extremely persuaded by, let's just say, the other people in their lives. I feel like this movie is so overlooked sometimes because it is kind of provincial in it. Well, I shouldn't say provincial. That's really the wrong word because it has a very um innocent kind of feel to it, but it shouldn't be overlooked. It's absolutely an amazing movie. And Ryan O'Neal really gives a kind of performance in this movie that is that you don't seldom or that you don't seldom, that you don't see very often. It's very seldom that you see this kind of performance. It's very authentic and it really does kind of feel like these characters are real characters. Um, they do a great job, both of them together. I will say that Tatum O'Neal does an amazing job also of being this sort of this child who is just so far above her years and yet at the same time wants nothing more than to be a child. It's kind of a great mix of everything. But there's so much awesome comedy in this that it's hard to pick just one other than that cashier scene, which I really love. There's a lot of deep comedy here, which once you see it, you understand not just why it's funny, but why it remains still funny to this day. So I don't have a ton to say about this because I don't know if a ton of people have seen it, but it really is worth watching, um, if for nothing other than this particular movie was when it came out, it was absolutely sort of the buzz. It was just it was a moment in time. So my number three, Paper Moon.
One that has been on my watch list literally forever.
It's it reminds me of remember I mentioned Dirty Rotten Scoundrels with Steve Martin before.
Hmm.
It reminds me of sort of like that idea, except it it is whole cloth a different presentation of it. But it still has that like same sort of it has that same matrix to it where it's like the con men basically just can't con enough because they always get conned back, so it's really well worth watching.
It's again, I've been intending to for so long. Maybe it's time I get around to it.
You definitely should. I think you should. I really think you'd like it. Knowing what I know about you, I really think you'd like it.
Let's see, 1973. Yeah, yeah, and it's on Max, so I should have no problem uh, being able to get that done. 102 minutes too. It's not a deep commitment.
No, it's
You
not
know what?
super long, and it
I'm
goes
gonna
by.
make it a
It goes
time.
by real fast. It goes by real fast.
It won't be tonight though.
Okay.
All right, my number two. My number two. I have to be honest. I'm tempted to move this up to my number one spot.
Hmm.
I'm very tempted. So tempted. Temptation overwhelming, and it's done.
Okay then.
My number 2 is not what I was going to talk about originally a second ago, but I mean, that's what it comes down to with this list. My top 2 are just so, I think, interchangeable with how much I enjoy them. It's it's basically an any given day kind of situation, you know? So my number 2, um, you know what? Not much to say since it's already been talked about tonight.
Oh,
Do you think you could guess what it is? What is my number 2?
I I I don't know. It's already been talked about tonight, like by me.
Well, if it had been talked about by me already, it wouldn't be my number 2.
Well, you could have said something in passing. The Jerk.
Yes,
Ah, nailed it.
just a brilliant comedy from Carl Reiner and Steve Martin. One of the and not to, downplay anybody else that was in the movie. It's just there's just so much amazing comedy in this movie. And that's what it is. It's just comedy in its purest forms. It's got wordplay, it's got slapstick, it's got uh smart satire. There's so much going on. And again, like you said before, there are some moments that may not uh, fly well with certain audiences, but even then, I would say because of the way it's done, because of who's doing it, it gets that timeless stamp from me.
Hmm.
Um, it it defies the odds. It defies any logical rationale when it comes to things that should be acceptable, but again, context and humor when it comes to a film like this are everything. And
Right.
I will say context is everything in everything. But
Right.
specifically, this movie does things that nobody ever could or should try to get away with. And because at the level it was done, it's all good. Uh, there's really not much else I can say other than my kids liked it too. So The Jerk is my number 2.
Nice. My kids also like that movie, by the way. My kids also thought that it was funny, even despite the fact that some, pieces were like, "Ooh." Most of it was just, wow, that's really good. So, yeah. Okay. Well, my number two, I will not change for my number one, but um, I could definitely see it as a number one because it's just absolutely that good. In 1975, Tim Curry dressed up in drag and turned himself into the Transylvania transvestite. And honestly, the world has not been the same since the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I didn't see this movie before I saw a play adaptation of it, and the play adaptation made me want to see the movie, so I did. I can't honestly. It is so funny. Meatloaf is in this. Tim Curry. Um, People that normally seem uh ridiculous as characters anyway are over the top even more in this particular movie and become absolutely ridiculous. It's so fun. This movie is just one of my most favorite movies to watch. Not to mention, I mean, the dances are one thing, the song, Let's Do the Time Warp, that's another thing, but just the performance by Tim Curry is so is so fun. I can't I can't not see him in that role. I just absolutely love him in that role. He is the best person I think that they could have gotten to play that particular character. It's just Mr. Frankenfurter. There's no way you can get a better character. Um, the premise of the Rocky Horror Picture Show is sort of like a Frankenstein kind of, but meets aliens. Because in the end, yeah, you find out that maybe they're not actually who you think they are, and all kinds of mistaking one person for another happens, and all kinds of tricks and treats, and yeah, it is just absolutely one of my most favorite movies, um, of really all decades. Just so happens that it's a comedy of the 70s. The fact that it's musical does not hurt, but I think that the storyline would be just as funny anyway, even without all the music. And yeah, everything else about this movie is just, if you don't know the Rocky Horror Picture Show by now, oh my gosh, where have you been living? You should definitely see Rocky Horror Picture. And if you've only seen like a contemporary remake of it, go and really watch the 75 Tim Curry version, because it really is sort of where so much started. So many mannerisms, so many, like when you see stage performances now, they oftentimes mirror what the mannerisms were for the 1975 Rocky Horror Picture Show. So definitely worth it. So my number two, not much fanfare, but all of my love, 1975 Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Epic choice.
I love it. I just love it.
That is one of those films that can end up on so many different types of lists.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
oh, so good. Uh, Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon. Let's not
Oh yeah, Susan
name
Sarandon was
them.
so awesome in that too. Oh my gosh.
I will say Barry Bostwick. I know him mostly as the
From
mayor from
Rocky Horror
Spin
Picture
City.
Show.
The mayor from Spin City.
Oh, the
Remember that
mayor from
show?
Spin City. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that. Yes, now I do remember.
That's I knew him from there before I knew him from anything. So when I saw Rocky Horror eventually, because I was in college when I saw Rocky Horror for the first time, and it's funny because I was in a drama class in college. One of the things that our professor wanted us to do was, come up with sort of a variety show type deal where we just got up and did things, you know.
Mhm.
And there was a girl in the class that was like, "We should do the time warp," and a few people were like, "I don't know what that is." Whereas I had seen the Drew Carey show. Um, Another tangent here. Uh, there was an epic musical um, battle between Drew and Mimi in an episode of the Drew Carey Show, where Drew and his friends were doing Rocky Horror, and Mimi and her friends were doing Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and they just had like this big dance battle mashup as they were outside the theater because Drew and his friends were like, "Look, you know what? We're feeling down. Let's go see a midnight show of Rocky Horror." When they get there, they realize it had been replaced. So it was the Rocky Horror crew versus the Priscilla crew, and it was a great dance battle. So that was sort of my introduction to the time warp. So I knew what it was, um, but the girl in class she's like, "Okay, everybody can come to my place. We'll watch it." And we went to her place, watched the movie. Well, before that happened, there was one person that was like, "I can't watch this. It's
Oh no.
it goes against my beliefs." We're like, just just a movie, dude.
What, you
Nobody's
don't
telling you to
believe in
dress
vampires?
up. Apparently, it was I'm not even sure exactly where his
I'm sorry, I can't
protesters
watch this. I
coming
don't believe
from.
in aliens.
He was a deeply religious fellow.
Okay, I'm not making fun of that, actually.
No, definitely not making fun of that. Um, so it was disappointing to not be able to have that extra set of hands and feet in the number. Um, so yeah, her contribution was we all did the time warp. It was a lot of fun. That was the first time I saw it. And for those of you wondering what my contribution was, I wrote a weekend update sketch and uh, we performed it live.
Nice.
It was back in the Jimmy Fallon Tina Fey days of Weekend
Oh, those were
Update.
great.
So it was me doing the Fallon part, and I'm gonna say I crushed it. So
Almost as good as Jane Seymour.
but anyway, back to the show. Not Josh tells him using anecdotes for an hour. Uh, we're at my number one.
That's another list show. That's another list show.
Yes, my number one. Is that where we're at?
Now we get to your number one.
My number one. Unfortunately, because I have, I guess, so I've seen so few movies ever. It's another one that I feel doesn't need to be really bored down on as far as explanation because
Oh,
we've covered it before on this show on more than one occasion.
must be good then.
I was so hesitant to add it because I was like, we talk about it so much. Why could I add it? So we have to talk about it again. And I came to the conclusion, look, it doesn't matter how often we talk about it because to me, this is genuinely my number one comedy from the 70s. And if anybody has a problem with how often I talk about this movie, well, tough.
That's the
My
attitude.
yes, yes, it is. But my number one is iconic. It's epic. It. I'm gonna say it. It's timeless. Stands the test of time.
Ooh.
It divides some people about what it is and what it isn't. And when they say that it couldn't be made today, maybe. Well, I don't like to say it couldn't be made today because, quite frankly, you can make anything you want today, whether or not you'll have the funding or the approval of, you know, theaters or major motion picture studios. That's a different story. But
Mm,
you can make it. You might be called out on it, but you could make it.
you could make it.
So, my number one with not only a bullet, but a bunch of bullets and a can of beans. Blazing Saddles.
Oh, right. Of course.
It's the only 1970s comedy that it was taught in my film studies course. It was literally held up as a shining example of how to make movies because it is amazing whether it's just the comedy stylings of Mel Brooks as interpreted by Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder, as well as such an amazing supporting cast. Um, or just the commentary that it had on uh, race relations in the 70s.
Mm.
Everything about this was ridiculously thought out. Every punchline beautifully executed. There, when it comes to comedy, this is it's like Mary Poppins. It's practically perfect in every way.
Mhm.
It Blazing Saddles is just one of the greatest films of all time. End of sentence. That's it doesn't get better, especially when it comes to comedy, when even westerns, I'm gonna say it's the greatest western ever made. I I can feel the heat coming from the audience now. "How dare you,
Mhm.
John
Okay, I could
Wayne?"
argue a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I between us, between you and me and the millions of listeners at home, I don't watch a lot of westerns.
Oh, I see. Well, I,
So
I
this is
watch
almost
tons of
a by
westerns.
default thing.
I see.
But the point is, Blazing Saddles is um, a brilliant masterpiece and will go down in history as one of the most intelligent, thought provoking, juvenile, sophomoric movies ever made. I mean, after all,
You
like
won't
I
get.
said, it's a movie about, sort of race relations with fart jokes
Yeah, you won't
blended
get any.
seamlessly.
You won't get any opposition from me on that. That's. I totally agree. And it has its own. It has its own charm too. Like it has its own. There's something else about Blazing Saddles aside from sort of it, being comedic genius. There's something else about it, which is just sort of like all Mel Brooks. You know, just carries everything Mel Brooks in it. So it's truly amazing. Truly, truly, truly.
You know what I should have opened this with?
What's that?
I should have said, "Oh, it's time for my number one." Well, excuse me while I whip this out.
Yeah.
Or if I had a bell sound effect, I could
The
say,
bell sound
"My
effect would be
number
great.
one's a boom."
That would be great.
Ah,
Um okay, so by default you now know what my number 1 is.
yes, I do.
Only because I didn't mention it all the way through the list and I said it was on my list and here we are at number 1.
I was
My
definitely
number
paying
1
attention.
choice is my number 1 choice for a comedic 1970s movie is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Um this is like I said before, this is one of those movies that I can watch again and again and again and again and again, and I never get tired of it, ever, ever, ever. I love it so much. But I also think that one of the reasons that this movie sort of like stands up is that it's genuinely funny. It's genuinely funny, and it's relevant, like it was relevant in the 70s, it's irrelevant today. Constitutional peasant is no less relevant today than it was when it was written. Some of the sillier lines, they're still funny. Nothing in this movie feels like it didn't sort of age along properly with the comedy. It is absolutely a gem, and I can't imagine my life without it. We've talked about this movie a lot on the show, so I won't go too far into it. But I, like you, find just absolute joy in watching this particular film, and I never get tired of it. It's always always funny. The Holy Antioch of Hand Grenade, or the Holy ugh, see, I can't speak. The Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch is always funny. The Killer Rabbit is always funny. Um, the bridge jokes are always funny. The jokes about the coconuts and the swallow and the everything. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody say, you know, uh, your mother was a hamster. I mean, like, it just doesn't get any funnier. It's just always funny, funny, funny. So, Monty Python and the Holy Grail gets my number one choice. Like Josh said, if you haven't watched it, go watch it because it's just so worth it. It is totally worth it. I swear you will want to watch it again.
It is a
So
classic.
there
I
we go.
kind of regret having it so low on my list because I do love it so much, but it is what
Choices
it
had
is, I
to be
guess.
made. Yeah, choices
Yeah.
had to be made. It is okay.
Speaking of our lists, I say let's recap what we got,
All
and
right.
then you give us our next assignment.
Okay.
Sound
I'm
good?
kind of excited about that. Yeah.
All right.
So you start.
For for 1970s comedies, my number 10, Going in Style. Number 9, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Number 8, Cold Turkey. Number 7, Slap Shot. Number 6, MASH. Number 5, Animal House. Number 4, The Muppet Movie. Number 3, Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke. Number 2, The Jerk. And number 1, Clerks. No, Blazing Saddles.
I thought you might try to swing that in there. I wasn't sure where. Okay,
I
my
tried.
list. Oh God, The Jerk, Up in Smoke, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, High Anxiety, Scrooge, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Paper Moon, 1975's Rocky Horror Picture Show, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So, all right, here's what we're going to do for next week. We are going to go a little bit dark here. And there have been, I, I mean, I don't know how many. I would hesitate to try to put this into an Excel sheet because I feel like I would spend the next 2 years of my life trying to figure it out. But there have been a plethora of movie put out there that deal with serial killers. And some movies are notably better than others. Some movies go a little bit off the deep end with their, odd associations. So I thought I'd try to like break this down a little bit and say, let's highlight our top 10 serial killer movies with no supernatural characters. And I don't just mean Sam and Dean. I mean nothing supernatural happening in the movie, just mean old serial killers. You think you can come up with that?
10 serial killer movies. I think I should be able to. Man, and it's not. I mean, there are a lot of different ways that serial killers are, you know, um, talked about in film. There are the ones that follow the serial killer and the ones that follow the investigation of the serial killer. What's the purview?
Well, I don't really have any. I didn't have any like notion of that. Just if it's a serial killer movie, that is a movie where the serial killer is sort of like in the predominant role of the plot. That's good enough. So it could be a detective movie about catching the serial killer, as long
Mhm.
as we sort of get the idea that, oh yeah, there's a serial killer thing going on here.
And it's not. And I'm just trying to clarify for as John Hodgman said, specificity is the soul of narrative. It's also the basis of a good list. And let's see. So it is not. Oh, there's a serial killer. Anyway, moving on. But it's got to
No.
be the plot.
Yes. Yes. The serial
Okay,
killer is the motive for the movie. Without the serial killer, there would be no movie.
I can't really think of too many movies where the serial killer is just like it's in the
A
background.
side point, up just a narrative plot point that just gets forgotten along the way.
Although that would be funny, you see these like mint articles and stuff in the background, serial killer on the loose, and it just never gets brought up again. At
I,
like
I, I
one
f- I
point,
feel
you
like
would
that
think
might
it
be.
cares. What's
That
that?
might be an episode of the Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
Keystone Cops might have, that very thing.
It's like at some point you would hope somebody would go, "Hey, wait, what?
Maybe we should do something about this.
Let's talk about that for a while." There's someone killing people, and we're here talking about cheeseburgers and how to pick up girls. There's a killer on the loose.
I mean, I trust that a good movie when you see one. And I trust that you are able to pick out the movies that where serial killers are sort of like, in the mix and it made a great movie. I think that this is sort of a slam dunk. There's so many of them out there. They're not all great, but there's enough great ones that, man, we could have a killer list. Pardon the pun, or not pardon the pun.
Well, not to reveal my hand, but just to be clear, Willy Wonka, is he a murderer?
Well, in the movies, he's not really a serial killer, so
Okay,
probably he doesn't count.
okay. I just wanted to make sure that that all of those kids that he may or may not have killed. Um, I guess it's a little ambiguous for the list. Okay, that'll be on the our top 10 movies where we don't know whether or not the main character is a murderer.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one, actually. Were you or were you not? No, we can get into that another time.
Well, Jen,
So like as an example, right? Even though in 30 Days of Night, which also really doesn't constitute a great movie, they kill a lot of people. I don't really consider them to be serial killers. I mean, they're kind of just vampires eating in the wild. So like that doesn't really count.
right.
And also they're supernatural, so now they really don't count.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think I have it.
All right. All right.
Well, that's our homework. Well, thank you all for joining us here tonight. And whenever it is you're watching slash listening. With all that being said, I guess there's only one thing left to do.
Can't imagine what
So
that is.
you stepped on it. Stepped on it.
I had to. I just had to.
Say goodnight,
Let
Jen.
me guess. Say good night, Jen. Good night, Jen.
Good night, everybody.